Hey guys, welcome to Local Relief Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking insurance. So if you live in Florida or anywhere where disasters do happen, you definitely want to know about this one. It's a new product coming up, but it is not the norm. So don't assume it's the traditional insurance. It is not. You can join us, grab a cup of coffee. I have Guillermo Franco with me today. You are going to, is it Dr. Guillermo Franco? It's Dr. Guillermo Franco, right? He's like, yeah, of course. So I have Dr. Guillermo Franco with me today, but seriously, grab a cup of coffee and join us, and you're going to learn about parametric insurance. So Dr. Guillermo Franco, thank you for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. It just so happens that you were in town for the Climate Adaptation Center conference yesterday, which was fantastic. And I will not reveal a lot of information because Bob Bunting will come back and he will tell you all about it. But Dr. Franco was one of the speakers yesterday. His information is so invaluable and just spot on. I like the different perspective that he has. So you're going to learn all about that. But again, I just say welcome and thank you, for joining. But I'm going to ask you all about it. So first, tell me about you. Tell me about your background. Obviously, you are not from the United States.
No, I'm from Spain. I'm from Barcelona. I came to the US in 1999 to pursue at Columbia University in New York. And I've been in the country ever since with some small brief interruptions back in Europe.
Nice. Yeah, very nice. So now what is your role?
I work for Guy Carpenter. Guy Carpenter is a reinsurance broker.
Okay.
So we help governments and insurers find protection for their assets. So we help them get insurance for their portfolios. So we are not a company that is typically in contact with the retail market, but we are part of a corporation that is broader. It's called the Marsh McLennan Companies. And we have sister companies that operate a bit closer to the retail space, like Marsh, for example, who is broker in the commercial space. Our role is to serve as advocates for our clients to help them transfer their risks more wisely, more comprehensively, and always as efficiently as possible.
Oh, wonderful. So, so if you're listening, you're not going to be insured by Guy Carpenter, I promise, but one of the companies that you work for probably knows exactly what Guy Carpenter is. So it is a big company.
Yes.
So that being said, you are working on something fascinating. I think it's very fascinating. But before I get into what parametric insurance is, I really want to bring to light of why you felt or why Guy Carpenter felt that there was a need for an alternative to traditional insurance.
Right. My role in particular in the company is head of research. So I try to work with my colleagues to come up with new products that are better tailored to the needs of our clients. Since the 1990s, there's been a type of product that has been commercialized more and more. This is called broadly parametric insurance. And the first materializations that we saw of this type of product was in a very niche market that we call the ILS market, the insurance-linked securities market, or cat bonds. And these are products that normally only large corporations or governments have access to. They basically bring risk to the capital markets, to investors who want to participate in the insurance business. They were mildly successful, I would say, during the 90s and early 2000s, but they are complex products, so people did not use them very often. However, as the technology has gotten better to measure events like hurricanes or earthquakes or flood events, these products have become a bit more well-known in the market, and people are making a broader usage of them. The key to these products is that they don't pay based on your actual losses that you experience, like a traditional product would pay. In a traditional policy, you would have an adjuster assess your losses to your house, to your car, etc. Mm-hmm. In this type of product, we pay based on some metric that we can measure. For example, we'll pay you an amount that is proportional in some sense to the energy that an earthquake produces, the magnitude or the location. So if your house is close to the epicenter of the earthquake, or the earthquake was very big, then you're going to get a bigger payout than if the earthquake happened far away from your property and was smaller, right? It's a relatively intuitive product. If you're close to the catastrophe, geographically speaking, you're going to get a bigger payout because we expect that your damages are going to be higher. Now, we know also from many decades of studying catastrophes that the damage patterns are not uniform, meaning that very rarely do we see whole neighborhoods completely destroyed. Most of the time, what happens is that, some houses get heavily damaged next to some houses that don't experience as much damage. Parametric insurance is not a good tool to differentiate at that very local scale. So it's not a high precision product like a traditional policy is. You're not going to have anyone come to your house to assess whether the roof failed or whether the windows failed. So we're going to look at a computer generated model that will say, based on the characteristics of this earthquake or based on the characteristics of this hurricane, we expect that your house has experienced heavy damage, and therefore we're going to pay you a high amount of your insurance. It's not precise,
Sure.
But on the other hand, it has the great advantages that it pays very, very fast. You were just talking to an adjuster, right? Who was saying that the key is to shorten this claim cycle.
Yes.
And that's very important because in a traditional claim, although you have potential precision to get an amount that is very descriptive of the damages that you experienced, at the same time, you may be waiting for months until you get that money. And we know that companies, small businesses, people don't have the budget or the financial means to sustain themselves for months.
Well, I think people, and I always say, I can't stress enough, is that people may know how to prepare, but people are never prepared to recover. And that being said, when you are hit with a disaster, you assume someone's coming to your house the next day. You assume it's a relatively quick process, and it is so far from. And I think from that standpoint from someone that, lives in Florida, has experienced first and foremost, not only the magnitude of what these disasters can produce, but just how many people need these services and how many people need the adjusters to come and how many people, need all of this stuff. And time is of the essence, especially with homes, and I think there, even just to, I don't want to talk on this one. I want you to talk, but I really think that the speed is, to me, the most impressive part of this, because you see the people suffer for months on end and they can't get rid of the materials in their home. And they have, when people don't realize when you have water in your home, it's not like tap water, that's runneth over. It is sewage. It is disgusting. It is toxic. So I think there, from that standpoint, more than me, you talk about the time essence and how monumental this is when it comes to maybe the difference between a typical adjustment or typical, adjuster coming to your home or the traditional methods versus parametric, how different it really is in the life cycle of someone recovering from a storm.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the speed, and the speed is probably the most visible element, advantageous element of these types of products, but also the transparency of the product, because everything is tabulated in the contract. At the time of the event, you can know precisely what you're going to get from your policy. So there's no uncertainty. This is good for both the insured and the insurer because they don't have to spend time and effort calculating or assessing what your loss is. They can basically go to a table that dictates what they're going to pay you. So it mitigates the risk for litigation, dissatisfaction, unmet expectations. It's a bit more clear as to what the outcomes are, which allows businesses to plan better because they know in what scenarios they're going to get what money, right? So the uncertainty is reduced. That's another advantage. The third advantage that we often talk about is the versatility of the payouts. When you buy a traditional policy, typically the recoveries are tied to a particular asset. You're insuring your house or you're insuring your car. You're insuring sometimes what we call time element, which is the loss of business that you may have because you cannot operate as you normally do, right? Now, that means that when you recover from the policy is meant to restore your situation before the event happened, right? So you have to apply these proceeds from the insurance to repair whatever was insured, your house, your car. But parametric insurance doesn't work in that manner. There's no parametric insurance asset that is defined per se. It is defined in a more holistic manner so that whatever proceeds you get, you have a greater freedom to spend it as you need. This is important because, here in particular in Florida, we're talking about expenses that may arise from evacuation procedures. You may lose power and you may lose your groceries in your fridge. You may have to relocate to a hotel. You may have to buy a generator. All these expenses sometimes are covered by traditional policies and sometimes they're not. Just because, it was not covered, even though some contracts have broad wordings, but it was not covered at the design stage of the policy. Parametric insurance is very forgiving in that sense. Whatever, in general, of course, every issuer of these types of policies will have their rules. But in general, what we see is that these policies are widely encompassing of any losses that may arise because of an event. This means that anything that you can justify was an expense or a loss due to the event that counts to justify your insurance proceeds. And, remember that the insurer has paid you based on a table. They already priced in whatever recovery you had. You already paid your premium for that. So it is also in their interest that you use those proceeds as you best see fit. They will give you some time to collect all the losses that you incurred and to just justify to them that you use these proceeds to restore your normal livelihood.
No, I think that's huge. But, and again, I can't stress, you don't know until you know. And as far as disasters goes, they're big, but even the expenses, just like you mentioned before, where, if you're paycheck to paycheck and if you're, month to month, it's really tough to buy a generator or to buy extra supplies and extra clothes and extra, even, whether it's furniture, whether it's outdoor, whether it's, damage your car, whatever the case is, there are so many, different scenarios, or even just the fact of if it's loss of work, where you're not able to go to work one day or a couple days because the kids are out of school. I mean, there are so many expenses, that are covered. So in learning about parametric insurance yesterday during the presentation, I think there were, it's fascinating to me of how you judge around, we're coming on hurricane season, so how you judge around that. What are the methods, that you kind of perceive, I guess, percentages of damage and, due to hurricanes? How do you judge that?
We use typically a lot of simulation software, right? Most of the insurance industry uses this type of tools that were developed in the 80s, and they have developed continuously over the last decades. We now have very powerful, very advanced, very sophisticated scientific tools that allow us to simulate the losses that can be derived from a hurricane or from an earthquake or from a flood. And these tools are not perfect, but they're excellent to help us prepare, right? And to help us price the policies, right? In order to know how much a policy costs, we need to know how often the insurer will have to pay, right? And these simulation software pieces are used to calculate those numbers. So a lot of effort goes into modeling, into simulation of these events that produces a set of scenarios from which we derive statistics. They're approximate, but they tell us how often, in general, do we expect to see a Cat 4 or a Cat 5 in a particular region. And based on that, we design these policies so that we capture as much of the risk that we can at a particular price point, right? Because it's not the same to protect yourself from Cat 1 events than from a Cat 5. If you want protection for a small event, you're going to have to pay more because they happen more frequently. Correct. So the insurer would have to pay you more often. And for that, they're going to charge you a higher premium. However, if you are worried only about catastrophic scenarios, a direct hit from a Cat 5 or a Cat 4, you can basically buy insurance for those types of events only, which means that your premium will be reduced because the frequency of those events is low, right?
Right.
So our job is to find the optimal balance between cost of insurance and protection derived from this insurance. And there's a lot of mathematics and modeling that goes into building these solutions so that we can guarantee to the extent possible that this is a proper, efficient solution for the client.
So one question I asked you actually yesterday, and hurricanes are messy. There's so much that goes with it. So yes, more people look at the eye and where did the eye go? And the eye went through here, or the eye went through whatever. People are so concerned with the eye. The hurricane is so much bigger than the eye, and there is damage so much bigger than rain and wind. I mean, we have tornadoes, we have all of that stuff. So if, like, let's say, the example again, I live in Sarasota, and, Debbie came through, the eye did not come through to us. So we weren't, typically in that line or cone, as people say, or whatever, but yet we received like 18 inches of water in a day. So that being said, we had a boatload. I mean, just monumental flooding that never happens here. So even there, if we are not in that infamous eye, do we still, is this coverage still available to us? Yeah,
that's a very important point. Hurricanes are very complex events, right? Mm-hmm. You can see a very highly concentrated hurricane that spins very fast and whose footprint is very concentrated and can cause a lot of damage. And you can have very widespread events with a big radius, right, that cover a large portion of the state and cause a lot of precipitation, flooding, and other effects. We try to model those different scenarios in these numerical simulations that I described. But of course, we're going to make mistakes. These are all approximations, right? To the extent that we can, we need to link the potential of damage for these events with the things, the metrics, the numbers that we can measure from these events. And typically we have some limitations in that space at the moment, right? What we can measure in a hurricane typically is the track that it follows, right? That is reported by NOAA very precisely, very publicly. It's on a website. We can take that track and say, okay, what is the damage that we expect based on this hurricane following this path? That's clue number one, right? Then we can also get information on the maximum winds that the hurricane is bringing. This is the number that is used to establish the category of the hurricane, right? So if we know that number, can we use that number and the path of the hurricane to refine a little bit what losses we expect from that hurricane? And that we do. We use the simulation software also to infer, based on those parameters that we can measure, to infer how much the storm surge will be, how much the precipitation will be. And we put all that together, but based on these few parameters, to come up with an estimate of damage for your property or for your community. It's approximate, again, and that is the reason why we haven't seen these products in the market until now, because I think the market has been very prudent, not offering these products that are imperfect just because of fear of misinterpretation, right? When you buy insurance, you're buying a promise to restore you. And this parametric insurance has caveats. We promise to restore you to the limits that the parametric insurance dictates. And that is a numerical approximation. And if that does not respond as expected, it can cause a very understandable frustration.
Sure.
So I think companies have been fearful about distributing these products that may be poorly understood by the clients and who may not meet expectations, when it matters, when you have a hurricane. So when we talked about parametric insurance yesterday, Bob Bunting's Climate Adaptation Center conference, right? We pitched them more as a holistic complementary device, which is very needed, especially now that the insurance companies are assessing risks and they're indicating to us that in some places, these risks are growing rapidly. And this means to us that they're expecting us to take a higher portion of our risk, meaning higher deductibles, maybe lower limits, and of course, higher prices, right? So there are gaps that are being created by their partial retreat in coverage, right? How do we fill these gaps? You can fill them with your own savings, but this is typically a risky endeavor and inefficient. Are there other ways in which we can fill these gaps? Parametric insurance is one proposal to fill part of those gaps. It's not going to be the solution for everything, but if you can rely, for example, on a parametric policy to pay you, let's say $50,000, if there is a category 3 or higher hurricane in your vicinity, well, that may help you cover your expenses. It may help you cover your deductible. It may help you cover other things that you're not currently insuring, right? So this is how we look at these products. We look at them as a complement, as a helpful complement that if properly understood, will get better over time because, every year we're measuring better and more about hurricanes, about our planet. So these products are going to become better and better over time. There's no question, right? So can we find a place where these products enter the market in a useful manner and give us a broader range of tools?
Right. To me, it's, even you saying there, people assume insurance is going to guarantee to a certain point, and it's not. To me, if I've learned one thing from talking to people, it's the fact that they never know what they're going to get back. And not only do they not know what they're going to get back, they don't know what they're going to get back, if anything. So I think just the fact that you have certain amounts and say, hey, this is what you're going to get back. If this is a certain storm, you can plan ahead of time. The blessing with hurricanes is the fact that it's not that instant, it's not the tornado that doesn't have a warning. We actually have a warning. We know in advance about what's going to come. Yes, there's always, changes at the end, but having that plan in play and knowing, hey, if it's a cat this, we get this. And if it's whatever, we get this amount. And just knowing that, and just like you said, it's complementary. So to have in addition to, at least there's a certain point coming in where you say, if we get this back, at least we can clean up. At least we can pay to do this. At least we can pay to do, to me, again, the timeliness is, I think, what's amazing, and the guaranteed part, because those two never exist, with traditional insurance, at least from what I have seen. So I think from that standpoint alone, and like you mentioned businesses, knowing what you get back and saying, okay, at least we have this amount that we can use for either mitigation for whatever, or that we can use to clean, or I think that's absolutely fantastic, from that standpoint.
Yeah, insurance is complicated, and most often it's not fun, right? It's not something we look forward to reading in the evening at home. We don't read our policies. I made an effort to read my own homeowner's policy one day because I felt ashamed that I was in the business and I had not read my my homeowner's policy.
Well,
so I did read it. I did read it.
Yeah.
And I think, most people don't understand the meaning, the consequences that are derived from these words that are in our policies, right?
Yeah.
Insurers naturally have to define very well what they're on the hook for, right?
Yeah.
What they're going to cover us for. And over time, this has led to added exclusions in our policies. So they've had bad experiences. They've had to cover things that they were not planning to cover, but they had to pay for them.
Yeah.
So every time something like that happens, oftentimes they add an exclusion. Well, we're not going to cover this anymore. These are not things that people are familiar with. First of all, you're not familiar with all the consequences that you're going to witness in a real scenario. As you yourself said, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we saw during Katrina, I spent a few months on the field doing research, and we saw a lot of consequences that, are harder to predict for people who are not familiar with these scenarios. Like, for example, the onset of mold. The fact that, you were chatting with an adjuster just before, right? With Kevin, and Kevin was very precisely describing, the cuts that you have to, the flat cuts that you have to make in the drywalls, right?
Yeah.
Because humidity creeps up and it destroys the drywall. However, what we also saw in Katrina is that after prolonged flooding, mold starts setting in the house, and it is nearly impossible to get rid of the mold once it starts to grow.
Absolutely.
Right? That means that a house that in normal circumstances would have been assessed as needing, let's say, a 6 feet flat cut, was now completely unsalvageable. It had to be demolished, right? You could not repair it. Why? Because mold had been present for such a long time that it was no longer a healthy environment. Right? So things like these are things that people, it escapes them because, they haven't had the experience. So it is important to see, will my policy cover me for those scenarios? It requires close scrutiny of the policy or great guidance from your broker, right? Or from your agent. And this is hard to get, right?
Yeah.
So that's why there's going to be the need for some more blanket forgiving coverage that is reasonable, right? It may be a small amount of limit, but if that limit can help you get back on your feet and solve some of these unexpected problems, well, let's welcome that product. One of the questions that comes up when we talk about real estate sales, especially a pricey real estate in a risky location close to the water, right?
Like
you have a beautiful area here. I understand why people want to live
absolutely.
here. It's wonderful, right?
Absolutely.
But of course, you're living very close to the water. So one challenge that some real estate professionals have here is the problem of selling this very costly property whose coverage is now threatened to some extent by the unavailability of insurance or unaffordability of insurance, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we cover that gap? Again, these types of products help us improve the situation a bit, right? Yeah. You could buy a property that is costly at a risky spot and you're aware of it. So you're going to have to do something to protect it. You can do mitigation, which should be step number one, right? Yeah. And mitigation is always the first thing to consider. We need to reduce the damages somehow. And there is lots of advice on how to do that. But you also need to protect yourself from potential financial consequences of this mitigation failing or not being sufficient. And if traditional insurance products are not available, you need to look at other things. These products that act as a hedge, if you will, if there is a strong hurricane coming my way, I know that at least I'm going to get part of my investment covered by this particular policy. And that helps real estate companies sell with more confidence. I think that is something that has not been explored yet fully, but it will, because again, it's another tool in our kit.
So where is this tool available? Is this tool available everywhere, or where can people find it?
Yeah, people can start to find it in the retail market. So we have now several insurers who are offering these types of products. So they are starting to become available in certain states. As you know, insurance is highly regulated. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be in states that are comfortable with this type of product. Sometimes regulators impose certain limits or certain constraints on the selling of these products. But we're seeing these products being sold in Florida now for, I would say, almost 2 decades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you can buy these from several companies here. And, they offer particular products. You have to find out whether they're tailored to your particular case. Mm-hmm. You have to become familiar with their ins and outs of how these policies work. But they are already available in Florida. They've also been available in California for a while, for earthquake, and in other places. As people become more familiarized with the system and regulators become more comfortable,
sure,
we're going to see these products more frequently in the market.
Now, do you have it available for fires, since you mentioned California?
Yes, we're selling, we've helped clients buy wildfire parametric policies in California. Of course, that market is difficult. It's very costly, right?
Yeah.
Because these are risky areas and we're seeing a lot of events. So this scares people who want to invest in insurance in that particular area. But we have been very actively developing these products in California, and some clients have bought some policies to cover themselves for these perils.
I want to go kind of back into parametric insurance and how it works and why you would choose areas like California and Florida and kind of the back funding. Can you get into a little bit of that, of like why this is different on the back end versus traditional insurance?
You're referring to the project that we have currently with the Climate Adaptation Center to study a reciprocal exchange mechanism.
That's different?
Yeah, it's connected, but it's a different... Yeah. So we started this year a project that I find very interesting, which solves another related problem, right? Uh-huh. One issue is the parametric product. This is the way in which we transact with one another, right? With an insurer and insured via a contract that is developed as a parametric contract based on some numbers that we can measure. What we have started to do research on here in Florida with the Climate Adaptation Center, as well as with Florida International University and the University of Michigan, is the potential requirements and potential for implementation of a reciprocal exchange mechanism. So that is a type of insurance company, right? Mm-hmm. But it's an insurance company similar to a mutual, right? In which the owners are the participants in the exchange. So you imagine a community like Sarasota, where the people here can buy a policy from this organization, and this organization is the citizens of Sarasota themselves.
Yeah.
So they're buying effectively insurance from one another, right? This is not a new mechanism. It has been in existence in the US since the 1800s, when companies in New York started to feel that they were paying too much premium to cover their operations when they bought insurance from London, right? Mm-hmm. Situation similar to what we see today. The players have changed, the geography has changed, but the problem is the same. So what did they do? These were companies that had a lot of savings. So they said, if we have the money to protect ourselves, why don't we sell insurance to one another? And that means that the premium goes back to us, right? Mm-hmm. We can save this premium and the investment yields that they generate, right? Which is where the insurers do their business.
Right.
So the reciprocal exchange is this type of setup in which the insurers are also the insurers. How does this work? Well, a community would decide to build such an exchange. Mm-hmm. They would hire what we call an attorney in fact, which is an organization that takes care of all the operations typical of an insurance company, right? Claims processing, policy issuance, policy design, and so on and so forth. But this is a party that now works for them, for the insureds, right? For the reciprocal exchange. Mm-hmm. So they're the masters of that process, if you will, right? Now, when they buy policies, remember, they're really buying policies from one another, right? So we thought no one, or I think now they're starting to appear in the market, these types of organizations, but until very recently, these organizations didn't exist on a parametric basis. But parametric offers a wonderful advantage. If you have to insure your neighbor, and your neighbor is far away from you, neighboring your community, you don't want to go visit their house to make sure that the claim that they had for the roof is real, right?
Right.
If somebody told you, hey, Heather, I'm claiming $50,000 for a new roof, and I'm going to get the money from our common reciprocal exchange. Naturally, you would, you probably trust your neighbor, but, you might want to make sure that...
Verify.
Right.
Yep.
Parametric insurance saves you that step. Why? Because the policy that was sold already determines under what conditions that neighbor is going to get the money. If the hurricane was a category 4, the money is already guaranteed. So you don't have to go visit the roof. They get their money and they can use it for the roof or for whatever they need, right? So it saves you the costs and the hassle of performing a loss adjustment process amongst the insureds, amongst the members of the reciprocal. That's why we thought these two systems, the reciprocal exchange mechanism together with parametric policies, would fuse very well to provide an efficient mechanism to a community like Sarasota or like many others in Florida to protect themselves. Now, when you have a community in Florida subjected to hurricane risk, and imagine that only members of the Sarasota community participate in such a mechanism, you have a problem of lack of diversification. If a hurricane comes, you're all going to be subjected to the same problem, right?
Yeah, not going to work very well.
Exactly. That's where we started pulling in our friends from California, right? We said, this is another community with similar needs, different peril.
Yeah.
They don't have hurricanes, but they have wildfires and earthquakes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So can we find another community, a sister community, if you will, to Sarasota, that would like to participate in this reciprocal exchange and build a surplus together? The prices can be calculated so that they're fair. This is not to say that Florida is going to subsidize California or California, Florida.
Right.
That is not like that. We would calculate what the appropriate risk is for the two different areas. We would find appropriate policies at appropriate costs, and then we would all pool our premiums together in this reciprocal mechanism. As more communities participate in this mechanism, the diversification increases, which means that the volatility of potential losses for the reciprocal decreases. Right. Now the reciprocal becomes a more stable mechanism. As years go by, more money is accrued, more power to the reciprocal, more policies can be issued, and more resilience can be achieved. That is the fundamental tenet that we're trying to explore here in Sarasota. And one key aspect of all of this is the acceptance of the community to buy into this mechanism. We know that parametric insurance, as we mentioned before, right, is a complex product. So sometimes people don't understand it well. We want to work with the community here in Sarasota as an experimental laboratory to see what are the requirements for a policy of such characteristics to be successful here. This is something that normally you don't see. The insurer did not come to ask you what kind of policy you wanted. They just offer you something. And because these policies are typically standardized, you don't have much say, right? You buy whatever they tell you to buy. This is a bit different because we can design the policy and test the policy together with the community in Sarasota until the community in Sarasota says, all right, we believe that this parametric policy is giving us what we would expect from such a coverage. You are now a part of the design process of the policy. Isn't that cool?
I think that's phenomenal.
So
it seems like it would be commonplace or common sense. It really does. But
so this is pretty innovative, right?
Absolutely.
So we want to explore, before jumping to implementation. And there are some companies out there who are ready to, to jump into the real arena. But we wanted to explore what are the potential frictions to this system before we jump into the arena of implementation. What are the factors that matter for the people who are going to buy these products? What are the regulatory constraints? Who are the stakeholders in this process? It's going to be some public entities, it's going to be some private entities. How do we structure these organizations so that everybody gets whatever they need? So this is a process that is going to last now for a few months. And my colleagues at the University of Michigan are going to lead that part of the process, but there's going to be a series of workshops.
So this is not available yet?
No. This is a research project, right?
Yes,
so
perfect.
we're just trying to build the foundations. At the end of the year, after we've done our investigation, the idea is to publish the results and say, hey, if we really want to do this, these are the things we have to take care of.
So Sarasota is the guinea pig.
Yes.
Okay. And then what other cities or areas are guinea pigs?
We are now in conversations.
Because you need the reciprocal.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Phase 1 is just focused on Sarasota. So we're going to work here with you guys for the next few months until the end of this year. And then at that point, we will try to expand this research to another community in California. We're still in conversations with some people in California, among them some colleagues in the regulatory department, the Department of Insurance in California, to determine who that community should be. But we have great candidates and we have great contacts there. So I think we're going to find an appropriate, interested community. Mm-hmm. And then we will partner the community. We'll carry out the same process there to figure out what are commonalities, what are differences. Yeah. And that will give us a better idea of how to build this thing potentially, right? And from then on, you can have other communities join the effort.
If other communities right now want to join the effort, can they?
Well, it would be lovely to hear from them.
Yes. So they would reach out to you?
Yeah. Okay. Of course. It would be a pleasure to discuss this with communities that are... We want communities who are aware of the problem, who want to participate actively in this process, who also have to be aware that all of these things we're discussing are still in flux, in development, right? But that's why we chose Sarasota to start, right? Because the Climate Adaptation Center here in Sarasota has been a leader in forming this community of interested residents. I mean, I've been now 3 times in a row here at the Hurricane Day conference of the Climate Adaptation Center. Yes. And I've met your mayor, Liz Alpert. I've met a lot of residents here who are concerned about this new environment in which we're living, right? Yeah. And these inspire me to discuss with Bob Bunting and say, listen, we're exploring these ideas. And I thought the community in Sarasota, this community around the Climate Adaptation Center was ideal to start exploring these things. That's why we chose it. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And, part of, kind of my mission and local relief just in general is for true community resilience, where this to me is a product of true community resilience, where, people can depend on people. And, I've said it before and I will say it a million times over again. At the end of the day, when it comes to disasters, it is, and will always be your neighbors helping neighbors. And I think from the standpoint of a neighbor and of a person, that is in the realm and is in the place where, we do have disasters, I think something like this is absolutely phenomenal. And from, if you look at really anywhere right now, there is some type of disaster, everywhere. Yes. No matter, where you are, what you live, there is something that's going to, knock on your door at some point. We hope it's less and less. We hope they're smaller and smaller, but regardless, there's always risk, yes, of wherever you live. No, that brings another linked point. Over the years, I've been working a bit with Janelle Kelman, who used to be the mayor of Sausalito in California. Mm-hmm. And she started all these organizations to bring together mayors from different cities in the US to brainstorm and think about resources, right? To confront these resilience challenges that we're seeing, especially on the coasts, right? I find these types of mechanisms, like we just described, a nice way in which communities can protect themselves, but can collaborate at the same time. At the end of the day, we're talking about money, right? Money is the currency. Money is being exchanged. Yeah. As long as we can find good flows for money to move around, it gives these communities a wonderful system to help one another. And that is what we're pursuing, right? A system in which communities across the US can work together to face these challenges. I think it would be not only useful, but philosophically beautiful, right? So your dream, like you have all these products, you know all this information in 10, 20 years, ideally. Like if it goes according to Dr. Franco, what do you see? No, I would like to progress with colleagues in the space, with all the companies that are already doing amazing work in the market, to a system that is more comprehensive, better linked, and that can have a bigger reach, right? We are seeing all these companies, all these efforts at the local level or at the state level. But the US is a great, big country subjected to many different risks. It makes sense for these risks, in my opinion, to be confronted together. Because You see, I come from Spain, as I mentioned to you before, right?
Yeah.
In Spain, we have an organization that we call the Consorcio de Compensación de Seguros, right? It was formed in 1939 after our Civil War. And the object of this organization was to compensate people from losses after our terrible Civil War, right? Now, over time, that mission faded away. But then they acquired the mission to compensate people from losses from catastrophes. This means that every time you buy an insurance policy in Spain for your home, you are paying a small little tax, a few euros, right? Mm-hmm. This gets put in a big pot that we all share throughout Spain, so that when we have an earthquake in the south of the country, or we have a storm in the north of the country, people are compensated from that big pot of money, right? We just had to spend about 3,000 million euro to compensate people from the great floods in Valencia, right?
Yeah.
But that comes from that pot of money that is accrued progressively. It makes sense for Spain. It has worked really well for many years for Spain. But imagine something like that for the US, right? Where your power to accrue money with such a vast country is enormous. Yeah. And then you can find a system to fairly distribute this money according to risk. I'm not saying it's a subsidy system. In Spain, it works a little bit as a subsidy system, but here it doesn't have to be a subsidy system. People can participate according to their risk that they're facing as well in the region. This can be modulated, right? Mm-hmm. These systems, you ask about the dream. Well, that is the dream I and some other colleagues in the industry have. A more comprehensive, rational, effective system with which we can face these financial risks that are coming our way.
How in the world do I comment on that one? I think that's absolutely incredible. I'm right with you. And I think the biggest thing and what I'm trying to do is really educate you guys on the products that are, out there currently, ones that you may not know about, but also things that are coming. And there are some really cool things that are coming. I absolutely love this reciprocal. So I think it's fantastic. I can't thank you enough. I really, really do. I hope you guys have learned. I have. Clearly, by my questions, you have found out I am not the expert. He is. But again, Dr. Guillermo Franco, I thank you so much for not only, being on the show, but for what you're doing and try to make our world a better place. So I really do appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Heather, and great to work with you. Congratulations on your efforts with local relief, and looking forward to working with you guys over the next few months.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching Local Relief. Please remember to subscribe, like, share. Be sure to download the Local Relief app and always stay tuned. We have more things coming. But again, I thank you. Stay safe. Talk soon.